Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of all the staff at the Clinton Foundation and the National Archives, let me welcome you to the grand opening of our newest temporary exhibit, Louder Than Words, Rock, Power, and Politics, which explores the fascinating intersection between music and politics. Before we get started tonight, I'd like to acknowledge a few of our special guests who have joined us. I'm so pleased that we have Senator David Pryor and Barbara Pryor and Senator Mark Pryor and Joy with us. Welcome. Thank you. Also, Governor Jim Guy Tucker has joined us. And former FEMA Director James Lee Witt and his wife Janie. Thank you all so much. Please help me also thank our local exhibit sponsor, Roadrunner Stores. Mike and Beth Colson have been such great partners and supporters and friends of the Clinton Center, so we truly thank them for their ongoing support. Can you wave, Beth and Mike? So grateful to you guys. And I'd also like to thank our opening reception hosts for their generosity. You'll see their names, I think, listed here on the screen. And I believe, is Bobby McDaniel and Destin here as well? No. Okay. Well, we want to thank everybody here for their sponsorship. Because of all of you, we are really able to provide this very unique educational and cultural programming, and of course, our wonderful Clinton Center members. We're so very grateful to all of you. And finally, I'd like to recognize some of the people and the organizations who have made the exhibit possible. First, the remarkable staff of the Clinton Center, which includes Ben Tillemeyer. Ben has really worked on this every step of the way from the time we went to see the exhibit at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to the installation, and also our wonderful colleagues at the Clinton Library, Jennifer Wisniewski, Diane Carlson, and Christine Mao. Would you all please give them a round of applause? Music can unite, and it can divide. It can empower, and it can enrage. It can pacify, and it can politicize. And this very powerful, one-of-a-kind exhibit, Louder Than Words, explores the critical role that music plays in shaping social change and political change. For me, I was a child of the 80s. And I'll always remember where I was when I heard U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday for the first time. The song and its meaning transcended the melody, and I knew that it was much more than just a song on the radio. I still really get chills when I hear it played because there was a real message there, a charge, and I knew that I needed to pay attention. In the 90s, you may recall that a certain presidential candidate used a power hit song from the 70s to serve as the theme song for his campaign, a song that spoke of hope and a promise that together we could make tomorrow better than today. Fleetwood Mac's Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow is now inextricably linked to the 42nd President of the United States, who also happens to be our first rock and roll president. And he may be able to tell you a little bit more about that in a few moments. So, before I go on any further, let me tell you what a fantastic program we have for you this evening. So we're about to get started. It's now my privilege to welcome Greg Harris, who serves as the CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm pretty sure he has about the coolest job in America. And I know I speak for everyone in this room, Greg, when I say thank you for preserving this American art form. Greg.
Thank you, Terry. It's an honor to be here at the Clinton Presidential Center for, as Terry mentioned, our first rock and roll president. And I think the only one right now. So it's an honor. There's another personal honor in that before being at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I spent 14 years at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And when I saw that blue 42 out front, I couldn't help but think that hangs in every ballpark. It's the retired number of Jackie Robinson in the same blue. I'm honored to be here in Arkansas. On the music side, the home, birthplace of Johnny Cash, Al Green, Levon Helm of the band, Charlie Rich, a sax player, Louis Jordan, great sax player, and Pharoah Sanders. Think about that convergence of music. You've got jump blues, you've got rockabilly, you have rock and roll, and it all comes together in your state. It's also the birthplace of one of our 2018 Hall of Fame inductees, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She was making music in the late 30s that sounded an awful lot like rock and roll, singing gospel with an electric guitar and just cranking. She's considered the godmother of rock and roll. And when people say the Beatles were influenced by the Everly Brothers and by Chuck Berry and others, Chuck Berry was influenced by Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Jerry Lee Lewis influenced by Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She is the godmother, and she's from your state. While we're talking about people, there's a few others I do want to mention. There's some of our staff all-stars in the room tonight. There's Karen Herman, who was the chief curator and really was the lead on curating this exhibit with the Newseum, as well as Caprice Bragg, who's our VP of External Affairs, is with me tonight. Can you welcome them? And there's one other all-star that we actually share. The previous CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a guy I was able to work with for a couple years and then step into his big shoes, is here. His name is Terry Stewart, and Terry is taking El Dorado and making it a music festival mecca. So he's really invested in this region. Terry, where are you? There you go. Good to see you, Terry. So when I listed those artists, we define rock and roll as a really big tent. It's not just four skinny guys with long hair and guitars. It's blues, it's gospel, it's jump blues, it's heavy metal, it's dance music, it's hip hop. It's all rock and roll where we come from. And our museum is 22 years old. Come visit us. Our mission, in that time, we've hosted 12 million visitors at the museum. And our mission is to engage, teach, and inspire through the power of rock and roll. Engage, teach, and inspire through the power of rock and roll. And you'll see this exhibit does that, I believe, quite well. So Louder Than Words talks about how music has shaped our culture, how it reflects our culture, and you'll see that it truly does impact it. It's not just a mirror. It drives change, it drives energy, and it drives engagement. Let me give you an example. Upstairs, there's a piece of the exhibit that is about the 1963 March on Washington. It's the day Martin Luther King delivered his great I Have a Dream speech. Well, preceding Dr. King at the dais that day was Bob Dylan, Mahalia Jackson, the great blues singer Josh White, Odetta, and her guitar is upstairs, by the way, Joan Baez, Hall of Fame inductee, right there, hand in hand with the Freedom Singers and those great artists before Dr. King. It's always been there. Fast forward, in a global sense, rock and roll is the sound of freedom around the world. The sound of freedom. When you think about a kid growing up in the Czech Republic, behind the Iron Curtain, hearing rock and roll music and saying, there's other people elsewhere in the world that feel the same way I do, that think the same way I do. But then you replicate that. In China, there are bars that celebrate Bob Dylan's birthday. They've done it for 30 years, playing his songs in China. In the Middle East, there's heavy metal bands cranking right now. It's around the world, and the same thing is happening in the Bronx. It's driving people, it's making them think, it's pushing for change. So think about globally. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, they weren't playing Mozart. They were playing rock and roll. There's a song by the Scorpions, a heavy metal band out of Germany, that was the soundtrack for that entire summer in Europe. Preceding the wall coming down, in the months leading up to it, David Bowie performed, the Eurythmics performed, and when they would perform in West Berlin, and they would turn the speakers to East Berlin and crank it. Bruce Springsteen played on the other side, and 250,000 people showed up. And about 6 weeks later, everything opened up. We're not saying he did it, but I think that drove a lot of people. So it's the sound of freedom around the world. Patti Smith, one of our great Hall of Fame inductees, has a great statement. She says that the electric guitar was the most powerful weapon of my generation. The most powerful weapon of my generation. So rock and roll has been with us. It's always here. It's the story that we tell upstairs in this exhibit, We hope you enjoy it. We're really honored that it's here at the Clinton Presidential Center in the state of Arkansas, and we hope you enjoy it and tell all your friends about it, and then come visit us in Cleveland. Thank you all.
And now, without further ado, the rock and roll president, the only rock and roll president, the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, want to thank Greg Harris for being here and for the great job he's doing at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I thank Terry Garner and Stephanie for always being there, and I thank all the priors and Governor Tucker and James Lee and Janie. Thank you for being here, and Mike and Beth Colson and all the people that made this possible. I remember as if it were yesterday going to the movie in Hot Springs to see Elvis Presley's first movie, Love Me Tender. And it was a great metaphor for life because he doesn't get the girl. But he sings a pretty song. I did my homework to the radio. We didn't get a TV till I was 10, and I mostly, even after that, did my homework to the radio. And it was always baseball games or rock and roll. I was shameless when I became president and using the office to expose myself to musicians I had always loved. You know, somebody asked me, one of the greatest things about being president, nearly anybody will come and play for you. We had a Georgetown reunion on the back of the White House, and I got Chuck Berry to come. And I know he was a controversial guy, but I got him. And I mourn his loss. Rock and roll is about love and loss and happiness and heartbreak. It's full of poetry, and it's been about politics. As has been said, in the 60s, there were lots of songs about civil rights and Vietnam. Also, about the loss of Kennedy and King. Abraham, Martin, and John is still a beautiful song, still worth listening to. Bob Dylan couldn't carry a tune, but he could carry a country. Whether his voice was good or bad, he was still a genius always. And there have been thousands of people with good, clear 3-octave ranges who never left a single song as great as the long trail of gifts he leaves us today. And he's still doing it. He is now, in his free time, a metal sculptor. And he makes gates out of old farm implements because his father ran a general store in Hibbing, Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, a little farming community. I have one of those gates at my house in New York. It's one of the best birthday presents I ever got. Best birthday present Hillary ever gave me was, sadly, a few years ago. I went playing golf with a friend of mine, and when I got off the golf course on my 64th birthday, the phone rang and Paul McCartney was singing "When I'm 64." I think it's worth pointing out that people who were otherwise gifted have tried to do things with their gifts. Sting is a great musician, but he's also given almost 30 years of his life trying to save the rainforests and endangered species. Jon Bon Jovi just got elected to the Hall of Fame. But every year he gives massive amounts of time to an effort to feed hungry people in the New York area. And he has this wonderful restaurant. If you show up and you don't have any money, he'll feed you, but you have to help him at the restaurant. Have to help him clean up, work in the kitchen, do whatever, but you can always eat there. And it's the only place I know where you can go for lunch any day of the week and you'll see multimillionaire business people having lunch with homeless people. So we don't get out of touch with one another. After I went to Steve Jobs' funeral, I was walking over to the reception, and all of a sudden, a woman slipped her hand under my arm and said, "You know, I cracked my hip a few months ago, and I need to lean on you. I'm going over there too." And I looked, and it was Joan Baez. I still think she had the clearest soprano voice I ever heard. I had made plans after I left the White House to finally go and meet one of my musical heroines, Nina Simone, when she died young, for me, at 70 in Paris, having totally left rock music and become a classical pianist. But I still believe the most underappreciated, profoundly beautiful song of the Civil Rights era is "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free." If you knew how it felt to be me, you would see and agree that everyone should be free. It was largely unknown until it became, in effect, the theme song for the great movie Mississippi Burning, about finally the calling to account of the people who killed the little children in Mississippi, Byron Della Beckwith and others, the civil rights murders. Every one of us has stories like this. One of the great honors of my life was to give the Presidential Medal of the Arts to my all-time favorite singer, Ray Charles. And we became friends. And when he got older and more reflective, he kept trying to reach out to other people. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting is I think his duets album is probably the best one ever done. But he also won his last Grammy with a song written by Leon Russell, made most popular by Willie Nelson, "A Song for You." And 3 weeks before he died, his office called me and said, Ray doesn't have long to live, and he'd given me a list of 12 people he wants to talk to, and you're on it. Will you talk to him? And I said, not before it takes time for him to call, of course. So he called me on the phone, and we spent 30, 45 minutes talking about the times we've been together, and I went to Fort Smith once to hear him. And I heard him in the most memorable concert of my life, June the 24th, 1967. I still remember in Constitution Hall, I carried the ticket stub for 10 full years. And I was so excited after it, I couldn't sleep. At 5 o'clock, I got out of bed and gave up trying, went out and ran 3 miles. Because it was in the middle of all this turmoil over the Vietnam War and everything, and he didn't sing any political songs. Then at the end, he sang "Georgia on My Mind," and he got to the beginning, and he just played the chord and just held it. And everybody was, "Sing, for God's sake, sing." And he said, Finally he said, Georgia? And the whole crowd stood up and started cheering because they were white, they were black, they'd been through everything. We'd been through all this junk, and all of a sudden here was something that brought everybody together at a deeply human level. Rock and roll did all that and much more. I was very honored that in my post-presidential life, I got to spend an enormous amount of time with Elton John and to do work with him fighting the AIDS crisis. And just watching him as a force of nature, no matter how old he gets, he still just makes the piano want to stand up and walk out of the room under its own power. Anyway, I also forced, under the pressure of my daughter, I forced myself to try to understand rap and hip hop, and that talking could be better than singing if you did it right. And I tried to understand all this stuff. But one thing I know, rock and roll has given everybody something. And everybody who has access to it, even if you never met any of the performers, has been moved in ways that I had an unusually fortunate opportunity to be moved. Not too long ago, a couple years ago, my friend Shimon Peres died at 93. I went to his 90th and his 80th birthday party. At his 80th birthday party, because he was the symbol of peace and reconciliation, a children's choir evenly divided between Jewish and Arab children sang John Lennon's Imagine. His song In My Life was voted in, I think, by Rolling Stone to be the greatest song of the last 100 years. There is something in rock and roll for everybody. And something about it that makes it difficult for us to ignore the parts that we just as soon not think about. Because it challenges us. Sometimes we don't like the way it challenges us. But it is, along with jazz, a gift we have given to the world. And I'm really grateful we could do this today. One of the great trips of my life was going to Ireland to celebrate the beginning of the Irish peace process. And we had 100,000 people in Dublin waving American and Irish flags. So I was on the square right by Trinity University, and we gathered in this old bank building built in the late 1700s, and I looked up and there was Bono and The Edge from U2, who helped to open this library. And Stephanie mentioned Sunday Bloody Sunday. So Bono calmly gives me a signed copy of the plays of William Butler Yeats from the 1930s, and I open it up, and Bono has written under Yeats' signature, Bill, this guy wrote some good lyrics too. We should remember that. All these artists, the ones like Janis Joplin, who died too young, and the ones like Tina Turner, whom I heard perform on her 67th birthday, they all gave us something that was inside us anyway. And now when I hear, Jay-Z and Common and Usher and John Legend and Justin Timberlake and people who think they're all real old and out of date. Whether I get it or not entirely, I know they're giving us something that was in there anyway. So I hope you enjoy this. Finally, I want to say I'm especially grateful that Katy Perry, who was so incredibly wonderful to Hillary for a year and a half, gave us a dress. Because if anybody ever proved that you could be modern and still be outrageous and bright and colorful, she has. Infinitely mutable and still constant. That's rock and roll. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Clinton. We are so glad you could join us here tonight. Most importantly, we would like to thank you for this beautiful presidential center that gives so much back to its community. And as one of the many people who works on our temporary exhibits, like Louder Than Words, I'm profoundly grateful that you are so interested in so many things. It gives us a lot of options to consider, and the temporary exhibits never get boring. I'd also like to thank you at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I agree with Stephanie, Greg. You have a job that is really, really great. Rock and roll is an art form that both reflects and shapes our common experience. This exhibit has taken me down memory lane a bit. Which songs resonated? What songs made me angry? What songs made me want to do or be something? Now, I'm significantly older than Stephanie, so the songs that made me want to do something were, well, there were many, but I'm going to keep coming back to Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young's Ohio. Neil Young wrote the song in reaction to Kent State University's shooting that left 4 students dead. As a student protester myself, that was the day our innocents died. When I heard it then, I knew that things needed to change. And when I heard it today, I realized that now, more than ever, things must change, especially on our school campuses. I'm 100% confident that today's student protesters will turn to music, and right now, somewhere, there's someone writing the song that they will remember many, many years later as the one that represents the day their innocence died. Thank you all. I hope you enjoy the exhibit. There's reception right outside, exhibits in the temporary gallery and the garden view rooms, so don't miss 3rd and 1st floor. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you.